그럼 먼저 첫 번째 발표부터 함께 듣겠습니다. 오늘 안데르스 헥토르 주한 스웨덴 대사관의 과학혁신참사관께서 함께하고 계시는데요. 무대로 모시겠습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ande르스 Hektor with a big round of applause for the first presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you to the organizers and for everybody to stay into the afternoon. I want to share with you a Swedish perspective formulated largely by Swedish experts on the carbon exit project. This is a systems levels perspective, and my main message is that smart city strategies are key to deliver results on national level. In order to comply with the Paris Agreement, it's appropriate that industrial welfare countries like Sweden aim at reducing emissions to near zero at the middle of this century. The Swedish Parliament has recently decided to have net zero emissions by the year 2045. For Sweden, this means reducing territorial emissions by at least 85%. And reaching the last 15% will be done through supplementary measures. Sweden is not alone to have high ambitions in this area. Also, the European Union has expressed a need to be climate neutral by the year 2050. And like the other Nordic countries, we also have a target of 100% renewable energy by the year 2040. Our goals for 2045 are 26 years away. It's both a long time and a short time. And in order to reach close to zero emissions in 26 years, incremental improvements will not be enough. We're going to need transformative changes in how we produce basic materials, how we design our transport systems, and how we produce electricity, heat, and cooling. We have favorable conditions in Sweden with large biomass resources, district heating, hydropower, and good conditions for wind power. So we have broad parliamentary energy agreement targeting 100% renewable electricity by 2040, yet there is no formal stop date for phasing out nuclear power. We do have nuclear power in our energy mix. But these have to be operated on market conditions, bearing their own costs, so there are no government subsidies to these facilities. And likely, at least some 3 reactors that have undergone repowering will be operated up to year 2040, which coincides with their lifetime extensions. The challenge is to get 100% renewable electricity systems in place, and Sweden works in all 3 principal fields of reducing CO2 emissions: reduced energy use, shifting technology, and capture carbon. Smart city strategies will be key for large parts of these areas. We need to use less energy. Existing building stocks are largely built in the 60s and 70s in Sweden in the big cities. And they offer a window of opportunity for smart refurbishment. There are many multi-family buildings from the 60s that can be insulated with a new facade entirely covered in solar panels, could make a building net positive in electricity use, meaning more is produced than is consumed, and there are such pilots. There are also pilots for positive footprint housing, for which both carbon footprint has been minimized in both the building process and operation of the building. We need to shift fuel and fuel technology. There has been a strong expansion in wind and solar power over the last 10-15 years. In addition, there has been a transition from fossil fuel-dependent heating sector to renewable fuels, facilitated by the district heating system, which is the main heating system for most urban heating. There are also tests with alternative fuels, which in the future can be produced in power generation plants with district heating systems. Thirdly, we need to capture and store CO2 from large point sources. We have substantial amount of heavy industries in Sweden, similar to Korea, and there is a challenge for these to comply targets on zero or near zero emissions. CCS is a technology which is discussed since it can remove emissions as part of an overall mitigation portfolio. CCS is discussed primarily for cement plants, refineries, and combined heat and power. When applying to combined heat and power plants and recovery boilers in the pulp and paper industry, it will yield negative emissions. And these are all industries that are very prominent in Sweden. One important topic for development and research is how efficiently to integrate large amounts of wind and solar power. These are, as you know, non-dispatchable technologies which in the future electricity system need flexibility on the demand side and load following generation which does not emit any CO2. We use the term variation management strategies to describe measures which offer integration possibilities for wind and solar power. And these slides summarize 3 types of variation management. Shifting is about shifting load in time on the demand side. Charging of electric vehicles can offer these services. In the future, EVs can even offer charging electricity to the system or to the buildings in a vehicle-to-grid system. And using shifting in a smart city strategy will be very helpful to use larger amounts of wind and solar. Absorbing is the second strategy, to convert electricity to another form of energy carrier which can be stored, such as hydrogen. Sweden is a large producer of steel, which is a process that produces a terrible amount of CO2. And Swedish actors is cooperating in the hybrid project to replace the need for carbon with hydrogen in the steelmaking process. So there's a good consumption side also for hydrogen, which will lead to something as revolutionary as fossil-free steel. Or fossil-free steel making, rather. The third type of variation management is complementing, to introduce flexible, dispatchable power generation, such as biomass-fired combined heat and power plants, or biogas-fired gas turbine peak units. In Sweden, we also have hydropower with large reservoirs which can act as dispatchable power. The importance is that efficient integration of renewable electricity requires increased sectoral coupling between electricity, industry, building, and transportation sectors, all necessary components in a smart city strategy. And all this is studied in the MISTRA carbon exit program as well as other research programs, of course. I mentioned steel. It accounts for 7% of emissions worldwide, steel production that is. In Sweden, cement and steel production account for 20% of all emissions. That's a very large amount. Clearly, these are important elements to build cities and transport infrastructure. We use it for buildings and for constructions, cars and rails. I should shift page. As the energy sector is decarbonizing, basic materials like cement and steel will have an increasingly large share of EU's emissions. Disregarding a possible scenario with fossil-free steel, if the hybrid project will become a success, the technologies to decarbonize are largely known already today. CCS, electrification, increased use of biofuels. Industries say they are ready and willing to go forward with these technologies, but too little is happening. Why is that? And the answer is that there is a lack of incentive for industry. I mentioned the challenges for the energy-intensive industry, or the basic industry, is lacking to comply with zero-emission targets. And the challenge is not so much of a technical challenge, but more of a policy and financial challenge. The cement and steel industries belong to the trading sector in EU. That is, their emissions are governed by the EU ETS system. The problem is that the price of an emission allowance is too low. It's too low to create high investments required to achieve the transformative changes in the industrial process. The technologies are available, which can make these industries carbon neutral. CCS, efficiency measures, fuel shifts, less clinker in cement production, etc. But they are costly. And as shown in the left bars, in the figure, it results in this material becoming much more costly. Cement 70% more expensive, steel 25 to 35% more expensive. However, if we calculate the cost increase to how much more expensive two typical end products will be, we can see that they will only be marginally more expensive. Okay, I didn't find it. Oh, there it is. This is also a bar, although it's very flat. And this is a bar, although it's very flat. So the increased cost for the final product, the car or a building, that is produced with CO2-free steel and cement will only be 0.5%. And it shows that we need a value chain perspective on this, which is also done in the Mistra Carbon Exit Program. We need countries that are prepared to be front runners, but why should they? The Paris Agreement requires the whole world to transform, and there will be an enormous market for low carbon products and services. And those developing these products will be winners on these new markets. That's a good reason. No one wants to sit on fossil assets in 2040. That's another good reason. Those that transform early will be well equipped in the fossil-free world. Greta Thunberg was mentioned earlier today. And the Greta Thunberg generation will work in low-carbon companies. They will live in areas that are climate-friendly and provide climate-friendly services. They will buy climate-friendly food. These are the future clients and the future consumers. So what can we do for our countries to become front-runners? We can do several things. We can push policy measures which price CO2 emissions sufficiently high. This is probably one very important issue. If you should choose one issue only, this would probably be the one. We can build on that there is an increased willingness in business to price carbon emissions, to take a value chain perspective. And we can take the lead. We can develop solutions and business models which are efficient and scalable with the ambition to be innovation leaders. And we can also develop collective action along value chains, much like the Greta Thunberg with her Fridays for Future is doing. From the production of basic materials like cement and steel to smart city strategies and to end products and services. I'd like to mention as an example Fossil-Free Sweden, governmental initiative to gather forces within key sectors such as building and construction industry. These will all be important for successful smart city strategies, and smart city strategies are important to our system-level solutions to reach ambitious targets in the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much for your attention.